I hope you're having a good day today. I wanted to talk to you about an important subject because this is a subject we need to be talking about all the time. Honestly, if you own goats, you need to talk about worms and poop a lot. You need to be looking at poop a lot and really paying attention to that because, as I say in so many videos, worms is a leading killer in goats. And you need to know that. You need to know what that means for you. You need to know what that means in your situation, in your location. And there are so many factors, and one size doesn't fit all. Where I live is probably completely different from where you live, and you just need to know your area. You need to know your goats, and you need to know which worms are your biggest problems. I said something in one of my recent videos when it was a really cold day. I think we were in that week where it was just terribly cold temperatures, and I said something like, "Do you remember from my parasite video what you're supposed to remind me?" You're supposed to say, "Delsey, remember, you're thankful for the cold because it stops or pauses the parasite cycle." So let's just talk about winter and worms. As you can see here, we're in the throes of winter. Winter is here. It's about 36 degrees with a feels-like temperature of 30. You know, we have had some warmer days. We had terrible cold, and then it warmed up enough to make a lot of ice, and we've been skating around as we do chores. And then it's warmed up enough to get rid of a lot of the ice, not all of it. And we do still have snow in some areas, but for the most part, you know, it has cleared off a lot. We had a lot of snow, but it did melt, quite a bit of it did melt in that warm temperatures. But we've still been getting really cold. Our pastures are not growing anything, and they won't be growing anything. They won't even be thinking about grass until May, and it won't be in full swing until June. And so we've got months. 5 months or so until it's even thinking about being able to put goats in the pasture because there's just nothing growing. And nothing grows around here for such a long time, and the growing season is so short. You know, our growing season is about 3 months. You know, June, July, and August basically are the growing season. We can have really big frosts in May, at the end of May, and we can have very deep frosts in very just cold temperatures even in September. So that is something that you need to view this topic and what I'm saying through that lens. I'm coming from a northern climate that is very different from where you live potentially. If you're living any farther south and in warmer temperatures, this really does impact how you raise your goats. Barber pole worm is the worm that causes the most damage and the most deaths in goats. And quite truthfully, I don't deal with barber pole worm up here like places that are warmer do. My main worms are probably the brown stomach worm, a tapeworm, and the bankrupt worm. So those are probably the most prominent in my area. I purchased my buck back here. So this guy right here, Prince, I purchased him 2 years ago, and she lives up here. She actually lives a little bit more north of me. And we were talking about the whole worm situation and how she talks quite a bit with people that are down south, and how just the amazement they have when she says, "I don't worm my goats but maybe once a year." And they were just amazed at that. But the same is true for me. I did worm some of my goats this year, but not all of them. And so a few of these goats were wormed in these my ladies here, my milking goats, but I did fecals and I only did wormed the ones that needed to be wormed. And so really I'm not worming but maybe once a year too. But if you are living in an area that is warmer and also breeds a goat, will affect how resistant they are. And if you've, been culling the goats that are weaker, that are more, prone to worms, if you haven't been culling them and you've been breeding goats that are more susceptible to worms, then it all comes down to genetics. It comes down to just how hardy your goats are, and there's so many factors in that. But if you're in a warmer area, you're most likely worming on a very much more consistent basis. And I guess, again, all of this is just to paint the picture that you have to be paying attention to your area and what's going on around you. And if my goats aren't out in this pasture eating, and there's nothing growing, that means that there's no worms that are reproducing or that are active out in this field. And so because they're not actively out there, and the goats aren't actively out there eating them, they're not getting a continual news cycle of worms. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have worms in the winter. It means that they are not getting that news cycle of worms from the pasture. And many times a worm can go dormant in the winter and then pop up around at the end of pregnancy and right around when they kid. So right before and right after they kid, their bodies, they've just done a miraculous, wonderful thing. And their bodies are just more prone for a worm to say, all right, this is the perfect situation, perfect setting. Here we go. Let's get this lady and get her good. And so many times you'll want to be really paying attention around that time to make sure that you worm if needed. And there are worms, though, that during the winter months, they will also become more of a problem. Some worms are, like the barber pole, are definitely more active in the summer months. Some worms are more active in the winter months. And that all of that really will be and needs to be a part of this discussion when we're talking about worms. She's taking a snooze. This is Olivia. Oh, yeah, feels good. So I just mentioned that there are some worms that do better in the colder, wetter climates and times of year, and that is the bankrupt worm. And so that's one that when you're doing your fecals, because hopefully you are doing your regular fecals and really paying attention to your goats and their poop, that's one you'll want to pay attention to and see if you're seeing in their fecals. The brown stomach worm is another one that will thrive more in the fall months and generally the cooler times of the year. And they don't kill as many as the barber pole worm. Like I said, the barber pole worm is the absolute nemesis for goat owners. But the brown stomach worm can also be a problem. And you don't want any of these worms to get completely out of control because they can wreak havoc on your goats. So with the bankrupt worm, you'll see more of the symptoms of diarrhea. Their hair coat will look more rough. They'll be a slower growing animal, and they just won't be as thrifty as they should be. So for worm eggs to hatch and to develop into a larva, there's two things that they need. They will need warmth and moisture. So if there's any type of a rain, even a snow, something that gets moisture into the air and the ground, and it's warmer, they will allow the eggs to hatch and then turn into that larva. The barber pole worm actually loves it when it's 86 degrees, and that is their absolute perfect temperature. Their most ideal temperature is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And after they hatch, they can actually, in as little as 6 days, those larvae can be ready to be ingested and wreak havoc in your goats. So it's a very short time that you can have compounding problems, because if you have a problem, then their goats are pooping it out, and then the eggs are hatching in the larva, and then, I mean, it's a really quick turnaround, really. Hello, Faith. Faith says hello. But the barber pole worm doesn't hatch under 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that again is that clue. Most of the year, especially at night, most of the year, except for a few short months, we are definitely below 50 degrees. And so it's not ideal temperatures for those worms to be surviving and the eggs to be hatching. But that bankrupt worm I was talking about will hatch at much cooler temperatures than that 50 degrees. So that's why it can be more of a problem in the cooler fall months in the winter. But again, when you're getting insanely cold temperatures like we can get, it really will slow down even that worm as well. But if you live in a more temperate climate, a climate that's just not as cold as here, you can be having more year-round problems with that bankrupt worm. So really, what it comes down to is you paying attention to your goats. I mean, really, I don't know how many times I can say that, but it's worth repeating over and over and over again. And being aware of what time of year you are in. So the end of this discussion is always pay attention to your goats. Pay attention to their poop year round, but know that in the winter months, depending on how cold you get, the life cycle of a worm can be either halted or slowed down. And that's because of when an egg will hatch, at what temperatures they will hatch. But that doesn't mean that you need to just completely let it go from your mind. If you're in a northern, really cold climate like I'm living in, that means that you need to make sure that your goats don't go into the winter months with worms. And when it is kidding time, and around that time, you need to really be paying attention because, like I said, that's when they start to wake up and thrive because of just the perfect conditions inside your goat. And so around kidding time, before, after, a lot of times 2 weeks before kidding, if they need it, you should be worming them. And so just know that if you live in a warmer climate, basically, probably anything south of me, I'm in Montana, anything south of me, you need to be paying much more attention or just realizing that goats will be more affected by worms than up here. Just encourage you to be on the alert and look it, guys. Oh, I thought she was about to jump. Watch this. I don't know if she's going to do it now that we're watching, but this one just today, has figured out how to climb through. This morning, I found her in on this side. Her mom is on this side, and I'm milking her, and I've had them separated for breeding. And now we just saw her go through this little triangle right here. So that's a lovely situation we need to address. Oh, I have no idea what I was saying right before she distracted me. I just know that we can call each other out and say, and make absolutes. Well, I live here, and so therefore this is an absolute about worms. And the next person who lives in a completely different place, well, I live here, and so therefore, this is the way it is. And that's just not the case. We all live in different places, and our different places, because of the climate, the temperature, the situations, our pastures, how many goats we own, what kind of goats we own. There's so many factors. All of that really does and will affect our view of worms and how we take care of them in our herd. But the end of all of this is that you need to take care of the worms in your herd. You need to take care of your goats. And so feeding them properly is really important. Having the minerals out is really important. And making sure that they're just nutritionally, that everything is correct and that you're giving them what they need to thrive in that way. And when they are thriving health-wise because of their nutrition and intake, they will be stronger and not as affected as a goat that's sick. So keep them healthy, and the worms may be less of an issue, but it is your job to manage them properly and always be doing fecals and giving them the proper wormer for the worm you're dealing with, and then making sure that wormer actually worked. You can never say, oh, well, I worm my goat, so therefore it's not worms, the problem I'm dealing with. Well, if you didn't check and double check to make sure that what you gave them actually was effective, then you really can't say, well, it's not worms because I wormed, because I dewormed them. So check if they have worms. give them what they need to get rid of that specific worm, and check again, and then reevaluate. Oh, I do hope that you are staying warm this winter. I hope your goats are doing well. And some of you have been sending me lovely pictures of your baby goats. Oh, I love them. They're so fun to see because I am months away from baby goats. In this last month, it's not been quite a month yet, but I put my buck in December 25th. It was a Christmas, I guess, gift to my lovely goats. And so they really haven't even been with him very long. And so we're looking definite, very early, late spring, early summer for my kids, and months away from having babies. But I just like to get as far away from these cold temperatures as possible. It just gives me peace of mind to know that the babies are going to be born in warmer temperatures and there's no chance of that spring snowstorm. Oh man, stay warm, hug a goat for me, and have a great day. We'll see you in the next one. I gotta go get off my fancy coat here. I put on my fancy coat for you guys just so I didn't look like an absolute bum, a goat yard bum. And so now I need to go get my nice coat off and get my barnyard coat on, get all hay filled, and feed these goats.